Thebes, year 2000 BC. Two men sit at both sides of a small table. On top of it, several game pieces lying watchful as if tokens of life. For death is lurking in the shadows. The twilight sun is covered by the dancing suns as the game unfolds. The victor will join it as it rises in the dawn. The defeated will lose its soul and wander restless forever. Hello and welcome to Ancient Gaming, where I cover all games and show you how to play them. Today we go to Egypt to meet one of the grandfathers of ancient board games. This is the game of the Netherworld. This is the game of Senet. With almost 5,000 years on its back, the game of Senet is, along with the royal game of Ur, the main contender for the title of the oldest board game that we know of, almost predating history itself. The game is firstly clearly attested in the archaeological sources of the First Dynasty, the earliest board being found in a mastaba at Abu Rawash, and the name itself first appears on an inscription of an offering list of the 4th Dynasty mastaba of Prince Rahotep at Medum. Senet means passing, and it carries a close parallelism with the concept of the transition between life and death, so it is not surprising to find it repeatedly in a funerary context. However, it is not until the New Kingdom onwards that the name is known to be directly associated with the game, that is, almost 1,000 years after we see it first written. See, the game of Senet's symbolism and significance changed throughout the different eras of ancient Egyptian history, which is an important fact to keep in mind, given that we're looking at a span of almost 2,500 years since our first archaeological references until the game fell out of use in the late period. To put it in perspective, think of Senet's history as longer than the history of humanity after the birth of Christ. Anyway, this is fairly common for games that lasted for so long, and we'll come back to haunt us in the gameplay section, for it is only natural for games this old to also change their rules. But during all this time, there is one thing that remained consistent, rarely changing throughout the course of 3 millennia and giving the game its unique identity. And that is the arrangement of the board in a grid of 3 by 10 squares, which is why Senet is also often referred to as, the game of 30 squares. As you have probably guessed already, we have a long way before us, both in terms of material and significance. So, in order to not get lost in the dunes of the desert, let's start from the beginning. The Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. From the Old Kingdom and through the Middle Kingdom, we have a total of 17 artistic representations of the game of Senet in tombs and tomb furnishings, which is quite a lot actually. We're not going to see them all here, but they consist largely of wall paintings and some rock-cut and three-dimensional models. What is most interesting, of course, is what these representations tell us about the game and how it was perceived in the society of that time. Ancient Egyptians paid a great deal of attention to the concept of death and rebirth, especially to the transition between both states. The individual was much more than their physical body, rather the core essence of their being was nested in their soul. A both fascinating and complex idea that was closely related to cosmology, and that will help us better understand how Senet would eventually become a playground for this philosophy. To better understand how Egyptians understood the concept of the soul, I am lucky to come today with the help of my dear friend and great Egyptologist Ana Diaz Blanco, who is currently in Egypt and helped me a lot gathering the materials for this video.
Hi everybody, welcome to Egypt. I'm at Team QH36 at Guad al-Khawa, and today we're going to try to explain the ancient Egyptian concept of Ba. Now, this term normally is translated as spirit or soul. However, we must not confuse it with its Christian meaning. So, ancient Egyptians believed that a person was composed by different elements: the physical body, the name, the shadow, the Ka, which was the vital essence, the Akh, which was the intellect, and the Ba, which was the soul. Now, it's important to note that a person cannot live without its Ba or Ka, so both of them were important to ensure the person's survival, especially in the afterlife. Now, we have references of the term Ba since the Old Kingdom, and it's normally represented by a bird with a human head. Now, this actually gives us a clue to a key aspect of the term Ba, which is its freedom of movement. This is when once the deceased is buried, the Ba can travel freely and then come back to the body, right? Like just like a bird flies really high up in the sky and then comes back to the ground. It's really the same concept. So the Ba is key to maintain the communication between the living and the dead. So a person could ask for help or plead to a late family member's Ba, or even they could be represented together in participating in religious ceremonies or even playing in board games, like the case of the Senet. So the Senet, actually, the game itself is a representation of how the Ba achieves its freedom of movement, and therefore can guarantee its key role in making sure that a person may continue living in the afterlife.
Again, some of this is already present in the Old Kingdom. In several tomes from this period, we have, for instance, singing and dancing scenes associated with the game of Senet that are part of the funeral rites dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Hathor being goddess of music, dance, singing and games, but also a funerary goddess who provides new life after death to the deceased. For the most part, however, the game of Senet was still conceived to be a secular device. That is, despite its appearance in a funerary context, the connection of the game with the afterlife was by all means explicit, and enjoyed instead a recreational tone that also shared other games and activities depicted in the paintings. Most likely, this game was older than its first representations in the tomes, and was played casually by the common folk, and would only start to be associated with this metaphysical nature once it became popular enough to draw these analogies. As we have seen many times in this channel, this is a common denominator of any game that managed to captivate large groups of people, and it was only in human nature to draw meaningful connections between their familiar mundane experiences and the realm of the unknown. And this would be the natural course of development for Senet, which, as my friend Anna has explained, was a very convenient tool to mimic most of the core elements of the soul's journey through the Netherworld. But for that, we have to go a little farther. The New Kingdom. The New Kingdom is arguably the most important period regarding the history of Senet, and that is almost exclusively due to a vital piece of information that explicitly details the religious applications of the game. I'm talking, of course, of the game texts. The game texts, or Senet game texts, is how historians refer to a body of written material that spans from the latter years of the reign of Ramses II to the reign of Ramses IV. That is, barely 100 years of the 19th and 20th dynasties of Egypt. These texts constitute their own genre of religious literature, and are unique insofar they portray a sequence of events in the progress of a game while rendering descriptions of the squares and events on the board with complex religious metaphors. In other words, these texts display the Senet board as a sort of netherworld, and describe its squares as the various stages the deceased must go through to reach the afterlife. Of all of them, the most famous is the one known as the Great Game Text, or Chthonic tradition, which is comprised of 3 long inscriptions that are actually copies of the same text. This text is based on beliefs related to the nightly voyage of the sun god through the various realms of the Netherworld, and many of the themes, events, and deities described are paralleled in the various books that portray this journey, like the Amduat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Night, and certain portions of the Book of the Dead. Let's see some examples of these analogies, so you know exactly what I mean. In the earlier sections of the Game Text, for instance, we can read as follows. They might permit me to enter the council chamber of the 30, so that I may become a god as the 31st. I will approach Mehen, and I will deliver his trotman to him. I will stop according to my predilection, and I will take my place in the house of thought. I will fight as a god with him. I will open the good house which contains Ma'at, so that the god might conduct me to the house of the 30 gods. The writer begins this fragment by alluding to the council chamber of the 30. In the text, this council is presented like a sort of divine tribunal, but we know this was originally a civil institution, an actual court of 30 jurists or counselors which was responsible to the pharaoh, and that arguably would later develop a spiritual nature and be associated with sacerdotal offices. By the time of the Great Game Text, this council had already acquired its mythos and was spoken of as a heavenly body, and even linked in function to the Hall of Judgment of the Book of Gates and the Book of the Dead, where the deceased must list the crimes and offenses they have not committed against 42 judges and Osiris himself. In the context of Senet, this council could be used as a parallel to the 30 squares of the game board. Again, testament to the spiritual strength and wisdom of the deceased, who must traverse the netherworld and overcome its dangers, tests, and trials. But the deceased is not alone. He will approach Mehen, who will, in the course of this journey, help him surpass these challenges. Mehen is one of Egypt's most mysterious deities. He is first mentioned in a coffin text of the Middle Kingdom, but also appears in the Amduat, the Book of Gates or the Book of Night, as a serpent god that guides and protects the boat in which the sun god Ra travels to the netherworld. In Senet, the player is likewise guided, protected, and instructed by Mehen in their journey through the netherworld. Mehen is also another ancient Egyptian game, but that's a story for another day. Following the text, the player will take place in the House of Thought, the moon god, presiding over scribes and knowledge, and often represented as a sacred ibis or a baboon. The House of Thought was also the first square of the board, since it was Thought who announced the arrival of the deceased into the Court of Judgment, and arranged that they be able to sail on a bark to the netherworld with the crew of Ra. The last deity mentioned in this fragment is of course the goddess Ma'at, who ruled over truth, justice, balance and order, and was extremely important in reaching the afterlife. After the deceased had passed through the Hall of Judgment, their heart was weighted on a scale against Ma'at's feather of truth. If the heart balanced with Ma'at's feather, they could continue their journey to the afterlife. If not, their heart would be devoured by the demon goddess Amet, and their soul would become restless forever. So you better play this game with a clear conscience. The journey, however, like everything, would eventually come to an end. As you see, by the New Kingdom, Senet had already become a metaphorical playground for the journey to the afterlife, and this fragment was only one example of it. In most of our boards, certain squares are marked with symbols that also allude to Egyptian mythology, and in some cases even indicate special rules or mechanics of the game. Square 15, for instance, was the House of Repeating Life, and is represented by a frog, the Egyptian symbol for resurrection. Players falling on this square drew an extra turn, just like the deceased would continue their life after death. On the other hand, draughtsmen falling on square 27 would be removed from the board. From that square symbolized the waters of chaos, over which the netherworld bark floated as it rose into heaven at dawn. Sinners that were denied a place in the bark were drowned in these waters, and it only made sense for this square to also be Senet's ultimate pitfall. The final square, the 30th, was that of Re Horachti, the name of the sun god as he rose into the dawn. By crossing this square with each of their pieces, players successfully completed the game of Senet. But far more important, they ritually joined with the sun god while still alive, and thus assured their survival of the ordeals of the netherworld even before dying. Or so they believed anyway. But every journey eventually comes to an end. The End of Senet. It is hard to determine when exactly did Senet fall out of use. The last datable Senet board we have is from the roof of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera and dates from about the 1st century AD. But evidence for Senet's existence goes on at least to the 3rd century, when we find it partly associated with mathematical or astronomical calculations, and linking the 30 squares of the board to the Egyptian 30-day cycle of lunar conjunction. If you watch the channel, you're probably used to me saying this, but people in antiquity very often linked games to divination and were prone to use them to draw analogies with cosmic themes and the elements of nature. I made a whole video about this phenomenon, but I recommend you watch as well my videos about the royal game of Ur and the game of Go, which are excellent examples of this. Anyway, in the case of Senet, as you have probably noticed by now, we see a tendency towards an esoteric understanding of the game, to the point that you even wonder if they stopped using it as a game altogether. Again, this is common with many ancient games that managed to reach a great deal of popularity, but it is hard to determine to what extent this perception is conditioned by our sources. Most of our archaeological sources of Senet belong, after all, to necropolises. Senet arguably coexisted as a secular device and a tool for religious inspiration for most of its time, but it most likely saw its end the same way the Royal Game of Ur did, replaced by other more popular games like backgammon, which was, on the other hand, the natural evolution for race games at this time. But we're not here to talk about backgammon, we're here to talk about Senet, so let's learn how to play. Most modern rules of Senet are a reconstruction based on different sources dating from various time periods during the game's lifespan. This means that there is no such thing as the historical rules of Senet, since we do not have a precise, complete description of them. And even if we did, that would only account for how Senet was played at a particular place during a particular time. This may be frustrating for some people looking for complete historical accuracy, but unfortunately it is all we have. Personally, I think part of the charm of historical gaming is finding exciting ways to play these games by coming up with fun ideas that make a game work from both a historical and a gameplay perspective. Anyway, the rules I am using here are largely based in those used in Board Game Arena, an online platform where you can freely play many different board games, including Senet, along with some minor adjustments. This way, if you feel motivated to play the game after watching the video, you just can go there and do so in a couple of minutes. So, with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the rules. Both white and black pieces are placed alternatively in the 10 squares of the upper row of the board. The pieces will follow a zigzag pattern and exit the board from the bottom right corner. Pieces can only move forward, and a player cannot skip their turn unless they cannot perform any legal move. In the case of Senet, we use sticks instead of the more standardized cubic dice, since this was the most common way to play the game back in the day. The sticks only have 2 sides, so the result is determined by how many of them land face up. 1 side up equals 1 square. 2 sides up equals 2 squares. 3 sides up equals 3. 4 equals 4. And 0 equals 5. There is also a bonus roll system. By rolling anything but a 2 or a 3, players get an extra roll of the dice. In Senet, there can be a maximum of 1 piece on each square. You cannot land on your own pieces, but if you were to land on an enemy piece, you would perform a capture. By capturing a piece, you simply swap the position of both pieces involved, with the captured piece going backwards to the square the capturing piece started on. Players can, however, avoid being captured by building walls. This is done by placing 2 or more of your own pieces next to each other, even if they are in a corner. 2 adjacent pieces standing on different rows that are not on a corner do not, however, constitute a wall and thus can be captured normally. Players also can move through walls if they roll a high enough number to pass through it, the same way they would with any other piece. In most of our historical boards, there are certain squares that usually have special symbols on them. These have special rules. Square 15 is the house of repeating life, or of rebirth, and is usually represented by a frog or an ankh, which is the symbol of life. This square constitutes a safe space for any piece and grants an additional throw to the player who lands on it. Square 26 is the one known as the good house, or the house of rejuvenation. It also constitutes a safe space and is a necessary stop for any piece moving forward. That is, if you were to roll a number that lets you pass through it, you must end your movement on it instead. Square 27 represents the waters of chaos. A piece falling here is drowning, and you lose your turn immediately. If you start your turn with a piece in the House of Waters, you have 2 options. Return the piece to the House of Repeating Life and proceed with your throw, or try to rescue the piece by aiming for a 4. If you succeed, the piece goes off the board. If you fail, the piece remains there and you lose your turn. It is important to notice, however, that you cannot move any other piece while one of your pieces is on the waters of chaos. The 3 final squares are usually represented by either simple marks like these ones or other symbols of Egyptian gods. None of them are safe spaces, and any piece captured on them goes straight to the waters of chaos, or to the House of Repeating Life if that one has already a piece on it. Any piece on these 3 squares cannot be moved unless the player rolls an exact throw to get it out of the board. And that is how you play the game of Senet. And that's everything I have for you for today. So don't forget to leave a like if you learned something new and subscribe if you want to learn more about other old games and how to play them. And if you want to go that step farther, share the video. That would really help a lot the channel. And thanks again, of course, to my friend Anna. She was of enormous help for doing this video. I would love to bring you again in another of these videos. And last but not least, thank to you guys again. Because since last video we surpassed actually the 1,000 subscribers, which is something I never thought would happen when I started this channel. And well, I'm out of words. So cheers to you as well. Until the next time.